super blessed on our way to Ottawa. Super happy that you guys are coming along for the ride. We're gonna learn a lot this trip. First day CAP Gender Symposium. Oh yeah. Yeehaw.
Elmer St. Pierre, National Chief of the Congress of Aboriginal People. I want to wish everybody their best and have a good time. CAP has advocated for the off-reserve status, non-status, Métis and Southern Inuit people for over 50 years. The vast majority of the Aboriginal people of Canada live off-reserve.
So for me, I understand the whole, what I call gender pronoun issue, but I'm also not, I want to be careful here. I'm not falling into the trap of the critiques of gender pronouns, the right-wing attacks. No, 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 no. I am more interested in being in a room with you to be critical of the pronoun usage without changing structure.
As Indigenous peoples, we always have to make sure, we always have to be on guard that we don't get consumed by other groups in a colonial society. And that's critically important. So one of the words we were using here about a month ago in the environmental groups is co-conspirators. Co-conspirators. People are gonna work with us and collaborate with us so that we get justice. But the question becomes, justice to what? And so it's the what that's really important. And the what, at least for myself as a Coast Salish person, is that justice within the terms of our peoples, our values, and our place, which is very distinctly different from a colonial state with a whole bunch of different groups inside of it, combating each other for some type of definition called equality.
Yeah.
So it's very, I just wanted to throw that in there because you're alluding to it, but you haven't really hammered it. And thank you, Hutch Gills.
But I guess thank you so much. But you're right. That's what I feel about Black work too. That when folks are doing anybody doing this work, they should first work on what I call the specificity of their issues. Name them, understand them, claim them, so they can speak to them with confidence without being interrupted by provocateurs.
Sure. Diana, I'm Diana Day, and I'm with the North West Indigenous Council as well, and I wanted to say I'm a Haudenosaunee woman who's been transplanted on Coast Salish territory, and I want to remind people that many of our nations are matriarchal nations, and I come from a long line of clan mothers from the Oneida Nation, Wolf Clan. And so I just want to point that out, that the vast difference is just enormous. And how, you talk about the white women and how the white women were treated, but they were seen as chattel. They didn't have much power and voice in their country. So just thinking about the difference here and how many of our matriarchal communities, they were responsible for choosing the chiefs of the clans and just such a total difference. And when the patriarchy came over, they saw that. And women had control of the trap lines and all those different things, and how the differences were made. So there's really no comparison, and so we really need to think about how it was and how the woman's voice is missing a lot of times in these circles and these talks, and how we need to amplify that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those contributions.
Yeah, Cook Jim, thank you for everything this morning. And my name is Brock Dean with North West Indigenous Council, and agreeing with everything and really trying to digest it. I think one of the things I'm struggling with too is with those labels that from our oppressor side, it's also how we do find community too. So how do we find ways to? Because sometimes it's if you're in an area you don't know the people and you're trying to find community, how do you maybe ways to find community through a decolonized way that it is without those labels? Or how do we use labels to, you say talk to your community, redefine yourself or decolonize yourself, but if you don't know who's there yet, do you have any ideas around that?
No, again, I always start with the assumption there are folks not included. And you need to come up with a strategy on how you look for them and how you find them. And what tools you're going to use to do that, right? I can't speak to those tools, I can't speak to those methodologies, but I always want us to make the assumption folks are always excluded from the project. And because folks are always excluded from the project, we need to also, in our public pronouncements and our public statements, recognize this represents this segment, but we know that there are many other voices out there not included in this project that we are still working on to reach and work with and get to, and we are going to get to you, we are hearing you. You know, you have to, part of this work is also about being modest. It's not about being arrogant in terms of saying I know it all. I don't know it. And I always start with the premise that I need to know more.
Right. I guess I'm thinking more from that individual level too, like, you know, as someone that identifies as queer myself, how, you know, who do I come from a small town, I didn't know anybody else. So I use that label as a way to then find others. So, but I now also recognizing I use a label that didn't fit with me, kind of like how you said, you know, that term gay wasn't the term myself, but it was something to help find community. So I guess it's like, how do we, as us collectively in this room, to make sure we use labels in a way to maybe help others because they might know that label.
Yeah.
Right?
It's okay, here's the issue. Colonization is the most successful project we have had in the world. Right? Colonization has taught us not to like ourselves. It's the most successful project. Colonization cannot be separated from capitalism. Two successful global projects. So we know if people have been colonized, they have been taught not to like themselves. Thank you so much.
Hello everyone, good morning. Hopefully everyone can hear me nice and loudly. My name is Bradley Cooper. I'm the National Youth Representative for the Congo Aboriginal Peoples. I'm a Mi'kmaq from the East Coast on Prince Edward Island, so I'm very happy to be in this land, the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, which this presentation was created.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Edgar Villanueva Cruz. I'm a member of the Tahltan Nation, and I'm here to speak about Indigenous masculinity and what that may mean for our young boys, our young men, and how we'll begin to change this narrative and start to create a space for us in the circle. And so firstly, I'd like to start this off by bringing about a few ideas that really came to mind when I began to think about Indigenous masculinity. Now you can see here that there's a picture depicting braids and that pride in wearing braids. So I think a part of it, as being an Indigenous male, is to be courageous. To be courageous to walk through this world with your identity, to create these new norms, and to transform them as what masculinity means for us. The courage to walk through this white world, and that to know that we are born with this value, and to have the courage to lament that and assert that in today's context. I think another part of that comes down to the history and how our men were warriors, knowledge keepers, facilitators of wisdom, kindness, and role models within our community. And to be accountable to our communities, our mothers, and our fathers. I also believe that in order to be an Indigenous masculine male, as to introduce this, you must walk with the Creator and walk with your spirituality and keep that in mind in your heart and wear that on your sleeve. I also believe that it is a big part of self-love. In order to be an Indigenous male or to be masculine, you have to love yourself and care for yourself and allow those vulnerabilities to be present, to braid your hair, to keep yourself well kept as a man. And then I also believe too, in order to be a truly masculine male, to be a role model, and to be a leader, you also have to recognize the principles of femininity and masculinity that are present in all areas of our lives and our cultures. What that means is that not to misconstrue our masculinity with forms of femininity, although these principles are interchangeable and they go hand in hand. Just as much as a male is a leader, the same goes for our women and our matriarchs within our community. My intention here today is to begin to change the narrative. So as we move on, we have a pre-colonial context. In terms of the pre-colonial context, we have very limited information on the forms of masculinity that were present. And the information that we do have has been misconstrued by settler ideology and settler notions of masculinity. Whereas during pre-colonial times, our men were leaders, our men were warriors, our men were knowledge keepers. So So we do know that, and these roles are respected as we were providers, and we held a great space within the community in order to honor and support our families. We were responsible for completing rites of passage in order to become men, whether that be the rite of passage to become a leader or to become a medicine man and a healer. These ceremonies were performed in order to empower us and to embolden us as men. In the pre-colonial context, our men were as strong as they could have been, honored, respected, and empowered. And so, once again, in addition, repeating, there's a lack of research on the impacts of trauma and how that has created this generational aspect, generational consequence for our young men and our peoples, and how this has impacted our health and wellness. As before colonialism, our men were in balance. And the outcome of this gap today has been very visible. And we'll begin to get into that as we move on to the next slide, into the present context today. As there are many pressures of white masculinity and this Eurocentric perception of what being a male means and how we must create this value, how Indigenous men are not born with value, how we must create that. We must work hard to empower that and to build that. And so when we discuss this, it is usually the focus of Indigenous women, but presently, Indigenous men complete suicide at a rate 3 times higher than our Indigenous women. Indigenous men are convicted at a much higher rate than their non-Indigenous counterparts. And our Indigenous men are more likely to be victims of homicide, and we are 4 times more likely to go missing. So, what can you do? I believe first thing you can do is to be able to let boys and men express their emotions free of discrimination, to avoid phrases like man up or boys don't cry. A lesson I was taught when I was young is that if you're to cry, you're crying for a reason. And in those tears that you shed, you should have pride, integrity, and be able to honor that. We should also be able to give our young men role models that encourage us to be principled leaders, to be accountable to our communities, and to walk with Creator, to know our cultures and our traditions, and to live in that, empowered. And also to teach boys to be accepting and to care of others. As someone that's a young man in my community, that's worked with cousins, family members, and youth, it's always about creating that space, something that is an environment for them to be learning, to be curious, and for them to be able to access parts of themselves and to be free of discrimination. And to teach consent, not just around sex, but around our bodies, and one's ownership of their body and themselves. And lastly, let the boys grow their hair with pride.
So I now welcome Teresa Edwards to the stage.
Residential schools, if you were or were not aware, you often hear by the media there's 138. There was actually more than 167, but they weren't captured in the residential school settlement agreements. So if, like my mother's, for example, she was a residential school survivor, she wasn't part of the compensation because all of the records were burned. So it didn't mean that all those thousands of people that attended, didn't have that experience. They absolutely did, but you won't hear about that when you hear the news, or because the news looks at the Department of Indian Cernac's website, which lists only those captured in the settlement agreement. So just wanted to let you know about that. You'll also hear that the last school closed in '96. In effect, it actually closed in '97, and we're still correcting that from a lot of our work, and we only found that out when we were out in the community and went up north, and they said, the Inuit told us, no, our school closed in '97. Sure enough, we checked the records and that was correct. And then what people don't know is a lot of the same school administrators that ran the residential schools continued to run the day schools. And as you know, with the day school settlements that we have, those closed well into the 2000s, and there were children that experienced horrors, death, unimaginable. And I'm saying harsh things, and I don't mean to be flippant, and I know you're aware that Angela's here, because it's a lot to understand. People can't even fathom it. And when I read articles like I read 2 weeks ago about, residential schools weren't that bad, even though we have undeniable scientific proof of children's bones where autopsies have said these children died from a violent act. You have deniers out there. And so I can't let myself be rattled by that. I have to just concentrate on working with the willing and working with the people who are willing to promote health, healing, and be good allies together to do the good work.
Hands up to you for a very comprehensive presentation on the legacy. But I think we all need to be very mindful that this doesn't have its genesis in residential schools. This has its genesis in the 1867 Constitution that formed Canada. And that legacy of creating reservations through the Indian Act of 1876 was a place that they built believing that we would just die off with diseases and so forth. The residential schools came into effect in 1879 as a means to kill the Indian and the child. And as you correctly stated, the child welfare industry has now taken up that industry around child welfare, where I think across this country, 62% of the children in care today are Indigenous peoples, non-status, Inuit, and so forth. So
it's over 80% in Ottawa.
Yeah, so it's very well alive today. And this young people that did a presentation up there on the youth around the book that they gave us, we're talking about who creates the narrative. Are we creating the narrative, or are we responding to a narrative that the government feels it's okay to talk about that narrative, but let's not talk about this narrative? And the reason I say that is because to kill the Indian and the child, this conference is about gender and identity. And we talk about these words, healing. We use this word healing, the journey of healing. Healing to what? The other word that gets used a lot is this word reconciliation. Like, whose reconciliation? What does reconciliation even mean? Reconciliation is based on the assumption that at one point there was a good relationship between Indigenous. I don't know where there's a history where there was a good relationship. So we should be talking about conciliation first. And then we, as we come across from the East Coast to the West Coast, is what are we really trying to accomplish? And it's really about being inclusive and bringing our people back together, our values back together, our governance and government back together, while we're living with a very hostile, unwell Canadian corporate state. So the challenges for us as a national organization and provincial organizations is that we have to define the narrative. We are the ones that have to set the course. The young man said up there around the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples, 4 times the amount of men and boys are missing than women and girls in Two-Spirited, right? But the narrative, again, the media and those that, and the Indian Act, 634 band councils that are broken up are matrilineal, matrilocal, matriarchal nations. And if we were really committed to reconciliation, then maybe we'd get rid of the Indian Act band councils as a viewpoint, so we can heal ourselves to our tribal nations and our tribal values and our tribal principles of full inclusion, where we all take our role within our villages and within our nation. So I just want to share that with you, because I think it's really important to know what Duncan Williams Scott was talking about and where we're at today, because to us it's no surprise. Our children are dying in care, and Canada doesn't have stats on it across every province. They don't. But in BC, we did a study from 2008-2015, 817 children were killed in care. 2,100 of the children were harmed critically. That's just BC for an 8-year window. Imagine what it looks like from 1997 to 2023 for every province, on reserve, off reserve, Métis, non-status, status, and so forth. So we're far from, we have to build our own narrative based on where we were, where we are, and where we want to go to. So with that, I just want to say thank you for your very well presentation. Thank you.
right, Congress of Aboriginal People, dinner time. Let's go. Community building, all that good stuff. Oh yeah. Hi guys, wave. Yeah, awesome.
Creator, we give thanks to Grandmother Earth, who provides all our nourishment to survive in this world. We thank the animals who have given their lives for this meal, all who have used their knowledge to prepare this meal, and for the servers and all the others who cleared away the table or any of them of the many chores for our enjoyment. We also give thanks for the company of many old friends and new acquaintances from sea to sea to sea who are sharing this meal with us. Creator, for all of us, we give thanks and we ask that this be so. Tahoe.
Here. This is one of your own here.
That's what I have is the Cherokee morning song. I don't know how far away.
That was great. You got a great voice.